Okay, zu guter Letzt gibt es noch einen Vortrag von dem Mann mit dem schönsten Bart im Publikum. Das ist der Carson Patterson. Ich darf die auf die Bühne bitten. Der Carson ist vom letzten Technologie- und Life Science Forum nahen auch schon bekannt und ja, hat einen sehr, sehr interessanten und guten Präsentationsstil und wird unter anderem die psychologische Komponente von Verletzungen nachher auch beleuchten. Carson, danke, dass du da bist. Ich kümmere mich noch um die Präsentation und du.
Danke, Bernhard. Erstens, ich möchte Bernhard danken und die ganzen Leute, die das alles organisiert haben heute. Danke für die Einladung. Und habe ich vergessen, ich mag meinen Vertrag auf Englisch. So I'm going to speak English now. Okay, so I want to talk about, and I'd also like to say, I'm also from the Olympia Centrum, and I get to work with great people like Chris, who you guys saw the evidence of what great people I get to work with, and also another coach is with us. I'm glad you're here, Freddie. And Christian, my boss, is here, so maybe my talk won't be quite as entertaining as it was last year because my boss is here. But maybe it will be because I'm retiring in less than a year, so we'll see what happens. So Bernhard asked me if I'd like to do a talk, and then I talked to Chris and thought, well, what am I going to talk about? And then I thought, well, I don't want to get too technical. I'm sort of a dinosaur. Chris's talk was pretty technical. The last talk by Marcus was quite technical. And sometimes I can be a technical guy, but I don't think I really am. So I just want to talk a little bit about possible ways to prevent injuries and the psychology involved. So there's only two things that I'm really going to look at today when I talk about prevention of injuries, and that's trying to decrease fatigue, and the other one is trying to increase concentration. And during Dr. Aberman's talk, she talked about over the season, and I wasn't sure if it was muscular fatigue or if it was actually fatigue in the ligament, but through fatigue, the knee gets weaker as the season goes on. Okay, so fatigue is definitely a problem in sport, and it's a problem with injuries. So overtraining or fatigue can cause injury, so I want to decrease fatigue as a coach. So I'm just going to show you really quickly what happens when you train. So you have a training stimulus. That's like a shock to the system. The body breaks down, and with rest, the system will recover, and if you're lucky and you had a good training stimulus, you'll actually have a super compensation effect. Okay? So that's basically what's happening with training. Basically, you abuse the body a little bit, the body reacts and makes itself stronger, or at least that's what you're hoping for. So this is not what really happens. This is just a theoretical construct about what might happen. But if the training is well planned, you have a good training stimulus, you have enough rest, the body will get stronger or fitter. If you don't have enough rest, or if the training is too hard, the intensity is too high, there's too much volume, you could actually decrease your fitness. And so what I find interesting is that when you start training as an athlete, you've taken a rest after the season, had a long break, so this red is fitness or whatever physical form you're looking at. It could be speed, could be endurance, could be strength. As they start to train again, this fitness level will be quite low. The fatigue is pretty much zero because they've had a break. But as they start training, the fitness levels go up, but there's often residual fatigue. So fitness goes up, but the fatigue goes up. And sometimes an athlete, if you're not measuring performance or you're not measuring things on a constant basis, the athlete thinks, well, I'm not really getting that much better. And you as a coach might think, well, I know he's getting stronger, but because of fatigue levels, they're not really seeing differences in their performance. And so as the training goes on, let's say this is over the summer with a skier. Sorry. As the training goes on, the fatigue level rises, and you get to a point where the fitness level is quite high, but the fatigue level is also quite high. So then they have a concept that we use in training, it's called peaking. And what peaking means is you try to keep training, but with more rest, so that the fitness level stays fairly high, but the fatigue goes down. So usually what happens is you try to keep the quality of training the same, but you just train less. That means usually less volume, or instead of training, maybe you're doing strength training 4 times a week, maybe you only strength train twice a week, and the volume during those 2 sessions is less than usual. So you're hoping that you get a decrease in fatigue. Told you I wasn't technical. And so the difference between your fitness level and your fatigue level is your performance. So sometimes when you peak, when you don't train as much, you might actually lose some fitness, but because your fatigue level is so low, you can still have a really good performance. There's a boxer, his name's Tyson Fury. I watched an interview he did with Joe Rogan, and he said he would rather go into a boxing match fat and out of shape, but fresh, than into a boxing match. He was a world champion in boxing. He would rather be fat and out of shape, but fresh, well rested, than to have a super fitness level, but be overtrained. So he goes into the match tired. He says, even when I have shitty shape, sorry, Christian, he's fresh and he has a chance. But if he has a super fitness level and he's tired, in his mind, he does not have a fucking chance. Okay? So I want to talk to you a little bit about an athlete I work with now. His name's Vincent Hulk. He's a gymnastics ring specialist. As you can see, he's quite muscular. I've had the privilege of working with Vincey this spring. It will be 6 years. This is what he looked like when he first came to me. And this is what he looks like now. Okay, so now you know that you can't believe everything I tell you, but I am going to tell you a true story about Vincey. He's not also a musclehead. He's quite intelligent. He just finished his master's in engineering, so I think some of you people might have a little more respect for him now. He's not just a jock. But we did a specialization program. As you see by this position here, his chest muscles have to be very, very strong. So we do a lot of chest training in his program. And we did a specialization program to increase Vincey's bench press. Bench press is you lie on your back and do this. He had a weight of 86, I get confused with German because it's 68. In English we say 68. Body weight 68 kilos. What do you think would be a good bench press for a guy with 68 kilos? 100 kilos, 110 kilos? He could bench press twice his body weight, okay? So this little guy, 68 kilos, could bench press 136 kilos. So, as I told you before, I try to decrease fatigue or try to not induce too much fatigue as a conditioning coach, because I always have to remember he's a gymnast and he's not a power lifter, and bench press is not his event. There's only 2 sports where they measure how much you can lift, and that's powerlifting and weightlifting. There's no other sport where it's really a concern how much weight is on the bar. So Vincey right now, I don't know this, but he could probably bench press maybe 115, 120 kilos. But he feels that's enough for his sport. He's on the rings 3, 4, 5 times a week. And he comes and he tells me my strength is good. I got enough strength to do everything I need to do on the rings. He still strength trains. We still do bench press, but we don't go crazy to try and increase it, because it's not about my ego to say that I coach an athlete who only weighs 68 kilos and can bench 136 kilos. It's about what he can do as a gymnast. So I don't want to induce fatigue by me being an egomaniac and thinking I have to get him up to 140 kilos. So we try to control the amount of fatigue that he gets from me in the weight room. And another thing I want to work on, actually, I forgot another story I wanted to tell you about this fitness and fatigue. I tested a sprinter in the lab one time, and he told me a story about how he had problems with his hamstring muscles. And on both legs, he had hamstring pulls. So he couldn't sprint. He had to take a complete rest from training. He either had 4 or 6 weeks off where he couldn't run, couldn't sprint. Then he slowly started getting back into training. And he'd either been training for a week or 2 weeks, and there was a track meet coming up. He was a 100-meter sprinter. And the coach said, well, you know, you're healthy, you're running well, don't seem to have any problem with your hamstrings. We're going to run you in this meet, but we can't expect anything because you haven't been training. You've only been training for 2 weeks. He ran his best time. And I believe, and he also believed, the reason that he ran his best time is because for one of the first times in his life, he'd actually gone to a meet well rested and able to reach his potential. And the other thing I want to look at is concentration. Okay, focus, it's like the point on a laser, and concentration is being able to keep that focus over a longer period of time. Pretty important things in sport. And one of the reasons why concentration is so important, if you're not concentrating, if you don't have your focus, especially in a sport like skiing, you might get hurt. 46% of skiing injuries happen in the final section. Could be due to fatigue, could be due to loss of concentration. I don't know what the reason is, but I think concentration probably plays a role. Anybody here play a musical instrument? Okay, quite a few people. And maybe you can understand that 2 minutes is a long time. Okay, sometimes people think 2 minutes isn't very long. But 2 minutes when you're trying to do something as perfectly as possible is a long time. Sometimes you've been playing a piece that you know quite well, and for whatever reason you think, okay, tonight after the seminar, am I going to drink no beer? Or I'm going to say, don't have any important classes tomorrow, I'm going to drink at least 5 beers. That thought only took maybe 2 seconds, but it brought you out of your rhythm, and maybe you screwed up your song. So different things can happen. You lose your concentration, you lose your focus, and if you're really unlucky, you might get hurt. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to tell you who it's about, but this is a ski racer, downhiller, ended up having a very, very successful career. But at the time, he was just coming on. It was his first season where he had skied really, really well. He was a downhiller. I was working with the Austrian team at the time. And he'd won a couple of races that season. And then at the World Championships, in downhill, they always have at least 2 days of training at the World Championships, sometimes 3. And they take the times during all the runs. He was either the fastest or in the top 3 with all the training runs. And the training runs don't always mean a lot, but sometimes they do. And so we were pretty confident that he was going to have a good race. So on race day, they have a an area where they can do some warm-up runs. They usually do GS runs and then maybe some free runs. And he was warming up, and I'm going up on the lift with him, on the chairlift. And this was in a country where they're quite famous for their pasta. And I won't say what country it is because I don't want you to get any clues who this guy might be, but where this world championship was. But like most Italian hotels we stayed in when I was with the Austrians, they had great food. And the pasta usually had about 5 or 6 courses, and the pasta course was great. So he told me as he's going up the lift, hey, Carson, when I was in this particular section in the course, you know what went through my head? And I said, no, I don't. What went through your head? I was wondering what kind of fucking pasta are we going to get for lunch today? And I immediately thought, oh, geez, that's the wrong thing to be thinking. But I didn't want to give him a sports psychology lecture when he's got his race in half an hour. So I didn't say anything. I just said something like, well, make sure you focus the whole time during the race. So as it turned out during the race, at the first split time, he was ahead. I think he was about a half a second ahead. The second split time, he was 7/10 ahead. Third split time, he was even more ahead. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be a world champion coach in about 32 seconds. And then I wait for the next split time to come because I've been watching the other splits and I knew what the next split time should be. No split, no split, no split. And then he ended up being about a half a second or maybe even slower. And it was in that section where he thought about the pasta. So it may have been a coincidence, but he didn't have his focus on the last training run, and he may have lost his focus on race day. And I think he ended up in 5th place. 5th place at the World Championship is pretty good, but when you could win the race, I don't think 5th place is really great. So I'm a conditioning coach. I'm not a technical coach. When I mean a technical coach, I'm not a ski coach. I'm not a gymnastics coach. So I don't work too much in the technical aspect with the athletes. I work a lot on flexibility, different types of recovery, regeneration, strength. So we spend a lot of time in the weight room. If it's an athlete who he has to do endurance training, I might help him out with his endurance training, but I spend a lot of time in the weight room with the athlete. So how can I teach him about focus in the weight room? I have actually seen athletes working out in our facility, so I'm talking about elite athletes, where they're doing their exercise. Hey, Bernhard, we're going to the Stiftkeller tonight for dinner. You think I can order the Schweinshaxen? Maybe a Wiener Schnitzel auch? I'm not focusing on what I'm doing. And if I don't learn to focus in the weight room, how am I going to be able to focus in my sport? There's a really good video with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm sure everybody here, because I'm in Austria, knows who Arnold Schwarzenegger is. I think it's called The Blueprint. And the guy just interviews him in a weight room, and he talks about how he used to train and different things. And at this time, he was already quite old. But there's one part in the video where he goes, you know, there were other guys in the weight room, and they lifted as much as me, and they trained as much as me. Some of them trained more than me, but they looked like shit. And he said the reason they looked like shit was because when they trained, they didn't focus on what they were doing. He was really big into mind-muscle connection. So a lot of times I'll see an athlete that I'm working with, they use some poor technique in the weight room, and I'll say, hey, stop, stop, stop. Go over it, sit down, think about what you're supposed to be doing, and let's do it properly next time. I told you, I asked who plays music. I started playing a musical instrument again that I played as a kid. I've been playing it for 4 years now. And my coach, or my instructor, he's a world-class musician. He has to tell me all the time how to prepare when I want to play a tune for him. And I'm thinking, I'm the coach, I know all this stuff, but I get nervous, and he has to say, hey, slow down. Play the tune in your head, maybe sing it in your head, think about how you're going to play it, Think about the first note you're going to strike before you start playing, and then play the tune. And don't just think, oh, okay, I'm going to play now. Mental preparation. And so when I'm in the weight room, I'll ask the athlete, okay, what are you going to focus on for this next set? I don't do this with every exercise that they do, but the main exercises, the exercises that are for that workout supposed to be important. So if a guy is squatting, and he's squatting 160 kilos, and he's going to do 3 reps, he needs to be prepared to do that. And I'll ask him, okay, what are you going to focus on? And I only want one thing. And he says, okay, I'm going to focus on keeping my knee spread out, or whatever the cue is that he needs to work on. And we do that. And then I hope that they can cross this over to their sport. And one particular athlete that, in my opinion, could have sometimes concentrated a little better in the weight room was fairly regularly not finishing his runs in his particular sport. Not all the time, but it happened quite a bit. And I think there's a real connection to the ability to turn on and focus when you need to. And you can learn that not just by doing your sport, you can learn that in the weight room. Okay, this is a pretty common expression in German. Sport is Mord. And Denny, you're here? Okay, that basically means sport is murder. Go Boilermakers. So high rewards often come with high risk. Can we understand an athlete's motivation? So I want to get into a little bit of psychology now. Don't know how many hardcore ski fans I've got here. There's probably a couple of you that like Formula One. I'm in Austria, so Formula One, some of you might know who this is, Sebastian Vettel. This is Axel Lund Svindal. You probably know him better than you'd actually like to know him. And this is Marco Buchel. Axel was a Norwegian ski racer, very, very, very good. Marco skied for Liechtenstein, very good ski racer as well, quite successful. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because Dr. Fink at a seminar a couple of weeks ago, a colleague of Dr. Abrahamman, she said that Marco Buchel was giving Axel shit because Axel had a lot of very, very bad injuries. 3 seasons in a row he got injured and had to miss the whole season. And Marco was kind of teasing him, hey, Axel, how come you're always injured? So Marco had 2 broken arms, and he had a knee injury that forced him to sit out for 2 weeks. Wow. I think we've heard Chris is laughing here. Chris had a video a while back, 1,000 days since he had his accident. So 2 weeks for a ski injury doesn't really say much about the injury, but didn't have many injuries, and he competed well into his 30s. And these are downhillers, okay? So Axel, 215, entire season lost to an Achilles tendon rupture. 2016, during the season, had to end the season due to an injury, and 2017 again. So pretty unlucky when it came to injuries. But he replied to Marco, hey, that's why I won, because I was willing to take chances. So now that they're quote-unquote old men, for me they're still young guys, but for you they're old men. I don't know, have no idea how Axel feels now about the many injuries he sustained during his career. But if you compare the success, I don't think you really can say that Marco was as successful as Axel was in ski racing. And Axel would probably say, hey, I knew the risks, and I took the risks, and that's why I fucking won. This is something Marco never got to do, to stand on the Olympic podium with the gold medal around his neck. So the risk reward, how far are you willing to go? And that's something that I have to try to figure out with my athletes. I don't need them to take chances, but if they're that type of personality, then maybe I have to accept the fact that they will take some pretty big risks. Just talking about injuries and what sport can do to you. If any of you have access to Amazon Prime, I would highly recommend this video. This is about an American football player. And then he told me, oh, dangerous to talk about American football because no one here knows anything about American football. Maybe a couple of you do. But this particular guy, he plays center. That means for every play, he has the ball in his hand before the play starts. He's right in the middle of the field. He's right in the middle of where it all goes down, and he gets pounded on every play. So every play looks like this for him. There he is running over somebody else, and this is him on the ground. He's done a great job because he's taken out a defender, and the guy with the ball can make a few more yards. So he's punished his body a lot with football, and during this documentary, they talk a lot about whether or not this will be his last season. They wanted to film his last season. He wasn't sure if he was going to retire. He had played 12 seasons, one of the most physically demanding positions in football. Some people tell me I'm a big guy, and I laugh because I also played football. I didn't play at his level, but I played football. And I always see myself as a little guy because I played football with guys like him who weighed like 140 kilos. When I played football, I weighed 85 kilos. And the average NFL career is only just a little over 3 seasons long. Injuries, maybe not good enough to last longer, but the NFL is very, very demanding physically, and he played 12 years at one of the most physically demanding positions. So this is a direct quote from him. No chance doing this again. Every logical thing is telling me to stop playing football. I tear my body apart. What the fuck is the purpose of any of this stuff? For a game? But the fucking jolt you get. Just the excitement, the rush you get from playing that sport, from being able to try to hammer somebody for 2.5 hours. Just something, you can't compare it. But man, it keeps you alive. It keeps the juices fucking flowing. What I've been worrying about is sitting at home and not fucking having that. Where am I going to be the best in the world at what I do? And that's one of the things I think is cool about sport. That there are a few people in the world that can say, today, I was the best in the world. There are a lot of really high-class researchers here. Very good surgeon. Dr. Aberman, can I ask you if you're the best surgeon in the world, the best knee surgeon in the world? No, you're not? Or I can't ask you that? Okay. Markus, are you the best Sportwissenschaftler in the world?
Probably not.
No, but if you get to that level in sport, on one particular day, you can stand there and say, I am the best. And that's a rush that this guy will never get again in life. And then at the end of the season, after saying he probably isn't going to play again, he played one more year. So he ended up playing 13 seasons in the NFL. So that's what makes an athlete tick. To be honest with you, I don't know what makes an athlete tick. But I try to understand. And if it's an athlete who's a high-risk athlete, I might try to convince him or her that maybe they shouldn't take quite so many risks. But if that's the way they are, I probably just have to deal with it. And I'm sure you've worked with athletes where you've said, probably not a great idea for you to go back to skiing or some other sport that they do. And some of them say, okay, doc, thank you, I won't. And some of them say, sorry, it's just too much fun. And then you have to think, okay, this athlete is a person. So they're not just a number to me. This has changed over the years. I always knew I was working with people, but I've become more of a people person in the last few years. I'm assuming a lot of you are students. Okay, and you go on this grading system 1 to 5, right? Okay, how many of you have you all know what your Notenschnitt is? How many of you have an average grade higher than 2? Okay, the rest of you, get the fuck out. Get out. You're not serious about your career. Maybe you want to be an academic. Maybe you want to do something practical in your field. If you don't have at least a 2, what are you doing here? Okay, we'll take a second now. You can think about what I just said, and you can give me later, maybe there'll be another break where we get to talk, or maybe I'll just run out of here. But you can tell me what you think of me when I have that attitude, and how does it make you feel? And that's the way athletes feel a lot. They may not get told that, but they feel that from the coach. And I try really, really, really hard not to think like that. And just to see that coach or that athlete as a person and what's important to them, whether they're going through, is there life after sport? Hopefully there is. And not just, hey, you didn't win. I've got 3 athletes that are hoping to go to the Paris Olympics. The chances are looking pretty slim for all 3 of them. Doesn't change my opinion about any of those athletes. They're people. One of them happens to be Vinci, who's got a master's in engineering. He knows what he's going to do when he finishes his gymnastics career. He knows what he wants to do. Some others may not know exactly what they want to do, but I have to see them as people and try to understand them as people. Why do they do the sport? I'm doing a really interesting therapy right now, and the therapist that I'm working with, he worked with a Premier League football player. He was one of the best football players in the Premier League, and he'd been playing for about 10 or 12 years. The club he played for wanted to extend his contract, and he realized during his therapy, he grew up very, very poor. He realized his main motivation for playing football was to earn money and get his parents and his family out of poverty. After playing 10 or 12 years in the Premier League as one of the best at his position and making millions and millions of pounds, he decided, I've had enough. He figured out what it was all about for him. Poverty was no issue for him, was no issue for his family, and he quit. I have to accept that. I've had athletes that weren't going to get to the highest level in sport. One of them is a medical doctor now. One of them will become a lawyer. And I don't think they reach their dreams as athletes, but they're reaching their dreams in other areas. And that's just as important. So I try to be a kind, gentle person at times. Sometimes I have to be a real hard ass. I worked with 2 athletes. They were partners in their particular sport. They'd gone to 1 Olympics. They were in a position where they had a really excellent chance to get on the podium. They were in 3rd place. This is a competition where they have to do their thing twice. And then in the second part of the competition, in English you would say they shit the bed, and they had a really bad race, and they didn't get a medal. And one of the guys, when they interviewed him on TV, he was crying, and his partner was there standing beside him and didn't know what to say. So then fast forward 4 years later, or not quite 4 years later, but almost 4 years later, because we're preparing for the next Olympics. There were a couple of issues that I knew this one particular athlete had to work on. He needed to have a better mental routine before his competition to know exactly what his routine was and how he's going to prepare for every race. And I had the feeling he wasn't taking it seriously enough, and he wasn't doing enough sessions with the psychologist that he was supposed to be working with. And I told him a few times he should get on it, and he was kind of getting on it, and he looked at me one time and he goes, "But it's really hard." And I thought, fuck, you're trying to win an Olympic fucking medal and you're telling me this is fucking hard? I was pissed, but I thought, leave him alone. It's not going to do me any good. He knows what he has to do. So here I have to play bad cop. I grabbed his partner one day, and his partner was the type of guy that didn't talk a lot. And I said, hey, you have to figure out a way to make sure that your partner does his job and does the preparation he needs to get you guys to go to your top potential at the Olympic Games in 6 weeks. And I don't know what you're going to do, but you got to talk to him and make him understand what he needs to do. And then to really put the pressure on him, and I said, if he ends up crying in fucking TV again before the whole fucking nation, you're going to be standing right beside him. So figure out how to get him motivated to do what he has to do. And I would rather not be that guy, but sometimes I have to be that guy. And then the same guys, they also had kids. One time when I was trying to ease the pressure on them, I said, hey man, you guys don't always have to take this stuff so seriously. When you come back home after being on the road for a month and your kid sees you, does your kid look at you and say, hey dad, you only got 5th place in the last race, I don't want to talk to you? Or is your kid really happy that you're finally at home? He says, my kid's happy I'm at home. And I said, yeah, that's the stuff that really matters in life. So you have a bad race, who cares? So I'm not always an asshole. I'm an asshole a lot. My colleagues can verify that I'm an asshole at times. My boss knows it too. But sometimes I'm a nice guy. And it depends on the athlete and it depends on the situation. But I have to see the athlete as a person. And with injuries really separate the athlete from the rest of the group. And so you have to think of ways that you can incorporate them back into the group and spend time with them, because sometimes they get hurt. And at the beginning phases, as Chris showed, we don't spend a lot of time with them, but you still have to check up on them and make them understand that you care about them, you're thinking about them, and you're thinking about them as people, and not just somebody that you can brag about that they won a couple of medals. So can injuries be prevented? Sometimes. 2 ways that might help: keep fatigue under control and increase focus. And then really important to me, try to understand the athlete and value him as a person. Thanks for your attention. Questions or complaints?
All right, thank you very much, Carson, for your talk. I'm not entirely sure whether someone has the courage to speak up to Carson now. But if so, please raise your hand if you have a question.